Hi everyone, for anonymity I'll be using fake names for this post. My wife Kara, 29 female, and I were married for 3 years and we were 2 peas in a pod. When Kara and I first met, I didn't think I would spend my life with another woman apart from her. I had this certainty about her, and from first sight I knew she was the one for me. Also, the increase in my heartbeat confirmed that as I approached her to speak to her. The first time I saw Kara was at a distant friend's birthday, which I was dragged to attend by another friend. She was sitting with a group of friends, and they were all chatting loudly and drinking. It was a late-night party, and there was so much to drink, but I didn't drink more than a glass because I wanted to be in the right state of mind for work the following day. The thing is, I used to be a timid person, and approaching ladies, gorgeous ladies like Kara, was a big deal for me. My friend, who dragged me to the party, noticed that I could not take my eyes off her since we arrived there, and without asking if I wanted to, he ordered the waiter to send her an expensive bottle of champagne and tell her it was from me. After it was delivered, I noticed that all her friends at her table turned in my direction, and they all smiled simultaneously. Then she smiled, raised her glass and mouthed, "Thank you." Almost immediately, my friend pulled me from the chair I sat on and asked me to go and say hi to her. He knew I had been single for more than 4 years, and he wanted me to maximize my once-in-a-blue-moon pull of attraction I felt. He knew I wouldn't like the idea, but he kept insisting, and after persuading and trying to convince me for nearly 15 minutes, I summoned the courage, walked to her table, and asked if we could talk privately. Her friends excused her, and we sat at a different table. We didn't say a lot that night, because I was stunned by her beauty, and to be honest, it had been years since I talked to a woman about something that wasn't work-related. I worked as a programmer at a prominent tech firm in our city, and considered anything other than work a waste of my time. We introduced ourselves to each other, and I found out she was currently doing her PhD, even without saying so much. I'm sure my constant blushes and ear-to-ear grin gave me away that night. When we delved into her work life, we discovered she worked part-time as a junior writer and editor at a publishing company, and I believed her because she sounded intelligent, and there was something about the way she spoke. After our little chit-chat that night, we exchanged contacts, and I left the party because I had to rest for a few hours before going to work the following morning. We had our first official date about a week later because I was caught in the web of deadlines, and she claimed she was busy too. Our first date was more fun than the night we met. We talked about so many things, and I loved that she was open and easy to talk to. She was very free-spirited, she smiled and laughed wholeheartedly, and it was evident that she enjoyed our conversation and our time together. After our first date, we spent more time together and visited each other's apartments. Before we officially started dating, she would come over to my place on weekends and we would try cooking a meal together from a cookbook, baking pastries with unique names, or just doing something fun. As weeks passed, we grew closer to each other, and I couldn't go to bed without thinking about her every night. I saw all the signs that convinced me she was the one for me, and I couldn't help but imagine what it would be like to spend the rest of my life with Kara. As friends, I would take her shopping and get her flowers, knowing she loved them. I also knew she loved me, and I could tell she wanted me to ask her out. Her body language said it all, and eventually I did, and she said yes. Money was not an issue for me. I had a good salary, and most importantly, I loved to spoil Kara because it made me happy. We dated for only 13 months before getting married. Our wedding was a beautiful beachside ceremony, something Kara had always dreamed of, and I was happy to make it happen. We kept the wedding small so we could use some of the money for our honeymoon, which we did. The first 2 years of our marriage were like heaven on earth. Kara and I were even more in love than when we were dating. Our bond grew stronger, and we did everything together. In fact, I only had breakfast, lunch, or dinner if it was with Kara. We would eat together in the morning before she left for work, have lunch at a restaurant near her office, and always have dinner together when she returned home. Even when she had to work late, I would wait for her so we could eat together. We also had a rule of going to bed early so we could bond, be intimate, and talk about random things before falling asleep. In our first year of marriage, I was promoted to a senior programmer at my company, and my work became fully remote unless I chose to go to the office. Kara had also finished her PhD and was now working full-time as a writer and editor at her publishing company, which came with a heavier workload. Unfortunately, a year after Kara started working full-time, she was laid off due to company downsizing. This happened in our third year of marriage and changed a lot between us. Losing her job took a toll on her mental health, and she became depressed. We no longer talked as much as we used to, or continued our weekend cooking tradition. She was a shadow of her former self, and it pained me to see her that way. I even offered to double her salary at the publishing company, hoping it would cheer her up. But it didn't. She told me she didn't work there for the money, but because it was her dream job. Dreaming of working as an editor in that particular organization, Kara's behavior was concerning despite our efforts to rearrange our house and her parents' house. It wasn't until a friend suggested she see a therapist that we began to see positive changes. Gradually, she regained her energy and became the vibrant, cheerful woman I once knew. She met with her therapist 3 times a week, and I even encouraged her to make it 4 times a week because I was impressed with the results. I wanted her to fully recover and return to her former self, so much so that I didn't notice the growing intimacy between her and the therapist. One day, while cleaning the house to surprise her, I discovered she had gone to her parents' house the day before. Wanting her to come home to a clean house, I even went grocery shopping and prepared her favorite meal with scented candles to make our dinner special. As I cleaned and folded clothes in our room, I came across a small journal hidden under a pile of clothes. It bore the company's insignia, and I couldn't resist my curiosity to read it. To my shock, I discovered that Kara and her therapist were having an affair, and she had been journaling about it. I was speechless and heartbroken. I read through the journal again to confirm what I had just learned, but the content remained the same. My wife was cheating on me, and she didn't even feel remorseful. She even wrote about how her therapist was better in bed than me. I must admit, I was deeply hurt and cried like a baby that day. All the plans I had made for us were ruined. I lay on our bed for hours, trying to come to terms with what had happened, but as the reality sunk in, I wanted them to pay for hurting me. I took pictures of the journal and filed a complaint with the therapist's office. I even brought the journal with me as evidence, and they were disappointed when they read it. When Kara returned home, I told her I had stopped by the therapist's office, and she was taken aback. When she asked why, I placed the journal on the table, and she immediately burst into tears. She begged for my forgiveness, but I couldn't bring myself to listen. Reading her journal had shattered my heart, and I couldn't forget the hurtful words I had read. I kicked her out of the house and threw her belongings on the porch. She was so ashamed and couldn't move, so I called her parents and asked them to come and take her away from my property. In addition, I sent photocopies of the journal to Kara's grandmother, who had always been fond of me. As a result, she was removed from her grandmother's will. Her parents pleaded with me to tell her grandmother, but that was my ultimate revenge plan. Eventually, we got divorced, and the therapist had his license revoked. Fortunately, we didn't have any children, making it easier for me to move on with my life. Kara became depressed and miserable after our divorce, and I couldn't help but feel satisfied knowing she had to live with her parents' disappointment and shame. She called the house several times to beg me to take her back, but I wanted nothing to do with her. The last time Kara came, she met another woman and attacked her. I was so mad that I called the cops on her, and after that I filed for a restraining order, and that was the last time I saw her. As for the woman she saw, we broke up because I was still hurting, and I have not completely moved on, but I'm glad I'm making progress. OP, you handled the situation maturely and gave her a taste of her own medicine. Despite being a good husband and trying to support your wife, she still chose to cheat on you with her therapist. I know the things you read in a journal must have broken your heart, but you should understand that humans are full of disappointment, no matter how close we are to them. It's sad things ended that way, but you should be glad it did. She probably hates you for ruining her life and taking her out of her grandmother's will, but revenge is best served cold. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Now let's move on to the second story of the day. The first time my wife and I met was at a small restaurant near my workplace. That day I went to have lunch with one of my colleagues, and I couldn't ignore her, sitting alone. I was used to approaching girls and sweeping them off their feet with my sweet lines, and I thought I would get lucky with my wife. But she completed the line I wanted to use on her before I did. I was impressed to see that, but it also meant she would be a tough nut to crack, and like I had predicted, she was. Instead of blushing and smiling like other women, she locked eyes with me, faked a smile, and continued eating her food. That was the first time I had been ignored like that by a woman, and it was embarrassing because everyone's eyes were on us. Still, overall, I found her attitude very charming and different from the rest of the women I had met. I kept talking to her without getting a response, and finally, after trying so hard, she smiled. When she genuinely smiled that time, I knew I had broken through her high walls, and with a snap of a finger, we were talking and laughing together. The conversation we had felt like we had known each other for a long time and flowed freely and naturally. Despite being complete strangers, we chatted like best friends who hadn't seen each other in a while, and at the end of my 30-minute break, we exchanged contact information and Facebook handles. There was something I was looking for, and when I saw it, I asked her out. I was convinced we were a perfect fit, and I didn't want to make the same mistake I made with my ex-girlfriends. Of course, she said yes, and we became inseparable. We even wore matching outfits occasionally because she thought it was sweet. We dated for 9 months before we got married, and though my friends thought I was moving too fast, I didn't think there was a better time to officially make her mine. About 2 weeks before our wedding, I leased a bigger apartment, and we moved in when we returned from our honeymoon. The first year of our marriage was splendid. I had never been deeply in love like I was with my wife, so I did anything I could to make her smile every day. Before we got married, I noticed that my wife was fond of my stepbrother, and she often talked about him when we returned from our family hangout. My stepbrother was a gym instructor, and as a result of that, he was heavily built. He was also handsome and the kind of guy ladies loved to be around. In the past, I had female friends who abandoned me the moment they met my stepbrother, and this mostly had to do with his looks. Since my wife had 3 older brothers and was used to being around guys, I believed she also saw him as her brother. I never suspected that her talking about his looks and how well-built he looked was her subtly telling me that she was into him. I was even glad that she had a way of always bringing him into our conversations as well as her brothers. This was because I wanted our families to be one big happy family, and I didn't want her shutting out my family members, including my stepbrother. I had been with him since I was 13 and he was 17, and I didn't want anyone to come between the bond we shared. On my 28th birthday, my wife decided to throw a surprise birthday party for me at home, and she tricked me into coming home early from work that day. I had to take the family emergency excuse to leave work early, only to go home to a packed house. My parents, stepbrother, and some of my friends were there, and my wife's parents and her older brother were there too. The surprise worked, and I was so happy to see everyone at my house that evening. It was a small party with a lot to eat and drink. By this time, our marriage was already 1 year old, and we didn't have any children yet. After eating and drinking, everyone decided to hang around since they were mostly family members and close friends. Also, it was pouring heavily outside, and no one had the excuse of going to work the next day since it was a Saturday. Everyone in the room was an adult, and in no time, we were arguing about politics and our economic crisis. The conversation grew intense as we all tried to out-talk one another, and that was when I noticed my wife was not with us. I didn't even notice when she left, because she was sitting behind me, so I asked around for her. Everyone said they had not seen her until her mom casually said she had seen her walk down the corridor with my stepbrother. At first, I didn't want to go and look for them, but after some minutes, and I didn't see them or hear their voices, I excused myself. Walking down the corridor, I paid attention in case I heard voices, but I didn't hear a sound. When I didn't hear a sound, I felt something was wrong, but I couldn't tell what it was. As I approached our room, I began to hear soft, muffled moans, and my heart nearly dropped in my stomach. I walked closer to our room, pressed my ear against the door, and could not believe what I heard. I was devastated and heartbroken, but I had to keep myself together. A part of me wanted to go in there and give them the beatings of their lives, but I knew it would only complicate things. So I slowly pushed the door open, and luckily they didn't hear a creak because they were so busy. I turned on my phone's video recorder, recorded them, and quietly returned to the living room. About 15 minutes later, my stepbrother returned first, and a few minutes later my wife came in. She changed her clothes and took a bath so no one would suspect anything. When we were finished, I asked if everyone wanted to watch a movie, and they all agreed. Then I told my wife to go and make popcorn for everyone. While she was making the popcorn, I transferred the video I had recorded to my flash drive so I could plug it into my large-screen television. We were all settled as soon as the popcorn was shared. I played the video, and though they didn't understand at first, their mouths eventually dropped when they watched it. My wife and stepbrother were the most surprised, and they couldn't say anything or defend themselves. They sat there speechless. Our parents were shocked and disappointed, and none of them could say anything. They were all ashamed and expected me to react in a certain way, but I didn't. Immediately after the video ended, I asked my wife and stepbrother if they liked the movie, but they couldn't maintain eye contact. Interestingly, it stopped raining at the same time, but no one made an attempt to leave. When my wife couldn't bear the silence anymore, she started crying and begging. Her mother was so angry that she yelled at her, but she didn't stop. I went into our room and packed her things so she could leave with her parents, and eventually, she did. No one dared to beg on her behalf, not even her parents. My stepbrother left before my parents, but what he had done caused a rift between us. Everyone left that day with their heads hung in shame, especially my wife, and there's no need to ask if I divorced her because I did. It was even worse because I never spoke to her again. I not only cut ties with her, but also with my stepbrother, and things were never the same in my family. It's been 2 years now, and I'm finally able to tell this story because I have been able to let go. Though it hurt a lot and I still don't think she deserved forgiveness, I had to do it for myself. I met another woman, and we're taking things one step at a time. OP, why would you continue to hurt for a woman who cheated on you with your stepbrother, not caring that the whole family was in your house? That's pure evil and disrespect. Both of them were toxic, and you did the right thing by cutting ties with them. That was the ultimate betrayal, and neither of them deserves to be in your life. I don't believe she would have only cheated on you with your stepbrother. She may have done the same with other attractive men. So consider this a good riddance, taking out the trash. I hope you are able to heal from this. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to my story. Take the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, share your thoughts on what happened in the comments below. If you have a story to share about your own situation or someone else's, please do not hesitate to contact me. Take care.